Hi, Padre B here. So today we're at the end of our calendar year. So this is like our New Year's Eve and sort of the last day in the Christian calendar. We have the Reign of Christ Sunday, and so what we're looking for today in our passage are themes about what Jesus's reign looks like. Like, what kind of leadership does Jesus teach, and what kind of leadership does he embody? The passage for today is Luke 23, verses 33 to 43. And in this we have the crucifixion, and in particular, the bit at the end where Jesus is on the cross. People are mocking him, saying to save himself. And in particular, we get this very moving passage of the two criminals that are crucified to Jesus' left and right. And one says to him, save yourself. And so he mocks him like the others have. And the thing is about crucifixion is, we really can't imagine, what a terrible death it was. It really is an instrument of torture. The cross is an instrument of torture. And this is a particularly painful death meant to set an example to others, to show what will happen if you acted likewise. So these criminals, we have to assume these are not people that have committed petty crimes, but these are significant crimes that the state wanted to show others that you would not want to do. And so, that's total speculation about what the crimes of the criminals who were crucified with Jesus, what their crimes were. But the point is that we have to assume that they were significant, that they were a public danger. And so we get a lot of criticism of Jesus. So we're talking about today Jesus' leadership, and so in his leadership he gets a lot of criticism. But in particular at the end, everyone is confounded because they're expecting him to come down off the cross. They're expecting him to save himself. And that's what they're saying to him. Save yourself. Save yourself. Why? If you are this great leader, if you are the one for whom we've been waiting, then why won't you save yourself? And so one of the things that I would take from this is that Jesus' leadership isn't about him, but it's about his service to others. It's about saving others. And so it's a really beautiful image of, although as gory and as awful as it is, using leadership as an example, not that you are not above the same treatment that others would get, but rather you have to suffer the same for the penalty. And in this case, Jesus is suffering the penalty for us. And that's the kind of the image that we get. And in particular, as we have these two criminals, and one is saying the same thing. It's like, come on, you're the Messiah. Get down. Save yourself. And he's, save us. Because we're up here too. And then we get this other criminal that says, this other thing rebukes him and says, hey, seriously, what are you doing? What are you talking about? We deserve what we're getting. This guy does not deserve it. And then he says to Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Remember me when you take your seat as the leader. And Jesus says to him, today you will be with me in paradise. So another thing about Jesus' leadership is he does not accuse the criminal, but rather obviously forgives him, because he's saying that this criminal, this public danger, is going to be joining him that very day in that thing that awaits us all, that afterlife, that the summation of all of the goodness that is calculated through our lives. And so this says something about the radical grace. So we talked about radical acceptance, radical welcome. But in this, now we get a very radical grace, which is all-encompassing. So that for anyone who wants it, we can join in Jesus' leadership. The example is, of course, is the reign of Christ, is that we are all supposed to set this example as well, and that we're supposed to be radically forgiving, which is very, very difficult. And the whole point is that if we can't do it on our own, this may be one of the reasons why we need God in our lives. Because if we can't do the forgiving for those people that have wronged us, that have hurt us, then maybe we need to turn it over to God and trust in God's forgiveness and God's ability to do that which we cannot do. Again, there's an interesting thing about this passage that I ran into lately, and I was really wondering if this is a good context to bring it up in, but it stuck with me throughout the week as I was reflecting on this passage. In the Netflix miniseries Dahmer, this is the passage where that the minister shares with Jeffrey Dahmer, which supposedly changes his heart so that he comes to accept Jesus and eventually seeks baptism. And, this is a really hard thing for us to think about and for us to wrestle with, because obviously this man, Dahmer, was terrible. He did horrible things. There's definitely a racial element to his crimes too, but his crimes are horrific. And he seemed to not show remorse. And so in this case, this minister shares this idea of the criminal being forgiven, and he really holds on to this. And for that last bit of his life, I hope that it was authentic, and I hope that it was something that he really considered. But that's something about grace too, is that we find for those for whom that need little forgiven, sometimes that understanding of grace can be difficult to grapple with, because if we haven't needed a lot of forgiveness, then grace can seem superfluous. It can seem not necessary. But for those of us who really feel like we have done things that are not good, this is when grace can be very freeing, because the idea of grace is not just an erasure, but rather that God sees us and knows our hearts so well that God can sense that pain and wants to take the pain of shame, of regret from us. And the reason why shame and regret need to be removed from us is so we can be free to do those good works, so we can live into the goodness that Jesus' leadership has set for all of us. That radical welcome, that living into a spirit which leads towards something that's larger than ourselves, something that's eternal. And so now we're at the end of the year, and so we've experienced this radical welcome, and we've talked about the nature of what comes next, and now we're kind of at the end, and we're going to restart, because the whole point of, as we talked about last week of all these stories, is this idea that Jesus is still in charge, and we're kind of like waiting for him to show up. But the whole story of Christmas is that he hasn't. And while we're all looking somewhere else, while we're looking for Jesus to come in on a horse in a suit of armor to fix everything, he's born quietly with the poor, with those that, in a barn, with those that have very little. And so that's the place where until the history is complete, we're reminded through the cycle of the church year that although we do look for Jesus in the spectacular, when we look for God in the big things, it's really in the small, quiet things, in those places where we've turned our back, where that God really happens. So we need to be more aware. We need to expand our understanding. And when we're asking of Jesus, like thinking about what the difference between the two criminals, one is, why wouldn't you, versus a remember me, so that I can be part of your leadership. I can be part of what you have set. And it makes a huge difference. it's interesting because it is about being part of something that's bigger than us, but it's also a very personal thing. It's something that actually reminds us that God sees us, that God has a plan for us too, that God has an idea of what we are capable of, and that is much more, much better than maybe we can even imagine for ourselves. And so part of that is to surrender the consequences of the things that have happened that maybe we can't forgive or we can't forgive ourselves for, and rather accepting where we are at. And although the world may not forgive and the world may not forget, that we are and can be forgiven and be filled with that grace and can walk forward, being able to share the light and spread goodness wherever we go. And that makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference. So go forth and do this. Go make a difference as far as you can, and go relying on God's grace and knowing it for yourself. I really appreciated this opportunity over the last few weeks. We're going to continue this journey through Advent, and Advent is a very interesting season, but we'll talk more about that next week. I hope this message finds you well, and remember, if you need to reach out, please do reach out to someone if you need to talk. And if you're feeling okay, then make yourself available for others to talk to you as well. Maybe even if you're not, you can still make yourself available. Like, that's part of the leadership that God sets for us, that the leadership that Jesus has shown, is that we are in this together, and that by being open to each other's spirit, by receiving each other's spirit, ours is also received. So take care, God bless you, and be good.